The market in Enugu was alive with chatter and movement. Traders called out, their voices echoing through the wide, dusty space. Women arranged yams in neat piles, men weighed bags of rice on old scales, and the scent of roasted corn hung in the air. But near the gate, sitting quietly by the drainage, was a woman whose presence no one seemed to notice. Her name was Nena. Nena was not born poor. She once sold fabrics in a small shop and cared for her sick husband until the sickness took him. After his death, her world fell apart. Her shop rent piled up, her goods were seized, and her relatives turned away one by one. Left with nothing but a tattered wrapper and a faded scarf, she found herself sitting at that same corner every morning, hoping someone might stretch out a hand of kindness. Most people passed her without a glance. Some muttered under their breath. Others dropped a few coins, not looking long enough to see the tears that sometimes rolled down her cheeks. Still, she smiled at everyone, whispering "God bless you" even when her own stomach ached from hunger. One morning, a convoy of shining black cars pulled into the market square. People hurried out of the way, murmuring and stretching their necks to see. The governor had arrived. Governor Chikobi was a tall man with a voice that filled a room before he even spoke. His suits were always spotless, his shoes brighter than daylight. He walked through the crowd surrounded by his aides and security men, smiling widely, shaking hands, and making promises he would soon forget. As he moved past the stalls, he noticed Nena sitting by the gutter with her hand stretched out. Her wrapper was torn, her face pale, but her eyes, those eyes, held a quiet strength that seemed out of place. He slowed his steps and turned to her, amusement dancing in his expression. "So this is what my state has become," he said loudly, making sure the cameras caught his every word. "Begging has become a profession now, eh?" His laughter boomed, and his aides followed, laughing even louder to impress him. The people nearby chuckled uneasily, some out of fear, others out of shame. Nena looked up, her lips trembling slightly, but she didn't speak. She only bowed her head and whispered, "Sir, I wasn't always like this." Life turned. But he waved his hand, cutting her off. Life turned. "You people love that excuse too much. You're all lazy. If you can sit here all day, you can find work. My government doesn't feed idlers." He turned to the crowd. "Let this be an example. No one should encourage begging. It breeds laziness." The security men dragged Nena away from the walkway. The governor dusted his hands dramatically and continued his walk, smiling for the cameras again. Reporters later praised his firm stand against street begging. That night, Nena slept under a wooden table behind the market, the sound of distant thunder rolling through the dark sky. Her body ached, her heart heavier than ever. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer. "God, if I've done wrong, forgive me. But please, let him know how it feels." Meanwhile, the governor returned to his mansion that night for a lavish dinner. His wife, Adaora, laughed as she told stories of their early days, and music floated through the grand hall. Everything glittered, the glass cups, the marble floor, even the chandelier above him seemed to hum with pride. But while he smiled and raised his wine glass, something in the air felt strange. A sudden wind blew open one of the wide windows, scattering papers across the room. He frowned. "Close that window," he ordered. But the guard who rushed to shut it slipped and hit his leg on the table. The governor's wife laughed lightly, saying, "Maybe it's a sign of rain." But it wasn't rain that came. By the next morning, the first whisper began to spread. A trusted aide was caught embezzling funds. Then another rumor followed, contracts signed without his knowledge. By evening, his name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Reporters who once praised him now used words like corruption, abuse of power, and mockery of the poor. Inside the mansion, phones kept ringing. Calls from the capital. Calls from political allies. Some went unanswered. Some ended abruptly. Governor Chaik sat alone in his office, staring at the screen where his own image flashed, the moment he mocked Nena at the market. Someone had leaked the video. It spread like fire. People shared it online, anger rising with every view. The same crowd that once bowed for him now called him heartless. Even his wife could not defend him. Her silence spoke louder than words. And that night, for the first time in years, Governor Chaik couldn't sleep. He walked to the balcony and looked down at the city lights. The same streets he once ruled over now felt cold and distant. He remembered Nena's trembling voice and her quiet prayer. By morning, Inyugu woke to a shock that swept through every street and newspaper stand. The once untouchable Governor Chaikobi was now the face of a public scandal that grew worse by the hour. The leaked video of him mocking Nena had traveled faster than wildfire. It wasn't just the laughter or his words, it was the arrogance in his eyes, the smirk that cut deeper than a slap. In offices, people replayed the clip again and again. In taxis and markets, everyone had an opinion. "Serves him right," someone said at a roadside canteen. "That poor woman didn't even insult him." Another replied, "It's God's way of showing that power is nothing." Even in schools and churches, people whispered his name, half in disbelief, half in satisfaction. Inside the governor's residence, the once lively compound was silent. The security guards who used to stand proudly at the gate now avoided eye contact with reporters. The cooks whispered in corners. Ada Aura, his wife, refused to come down for breakfast. Her eyes were swollen, her voice gone hoarse from arguing all night. Governor Chaik sat alone in his study, wearing the same shirt from the night before. The television screen in front of him showed endless debates about his behavior. Some guests on a political talk show argued that the video had been taken out of context. Others said it revealed his true character. Every word felt like a nail driven deeper into his chest. His phone vibrated non-stop. Calls from the party chairman, from fellow governors, from journalists who once treated him like royalty. He ignored most of them until one call came through from Abuja. The voice on the other end was cold and direct. "Chaik, this mess is too loud. The presidency is asking questions. You need to issue a statement immediately, and you better make it sound humble. If you don't handle this well, the party will distance itself from you." He muttered a weak "yes sir," before ending the call. For the first time in years, his confidence was gone. He sat back, staring at the framed portrait of himself in the office, his bright smile, his hand raised high during his swearing-in ceremony. He could barely recognize that man now. By afternoon, news vans were parked outside his gate. Cameras flashed, microphones waited. The same journalists he once waved to proudly now shouted questions with no mercy. "Governor Chaik, do you regret your statement about the beggar woman? Have you spoken to her since the incident? Did you mock the poor out of pride or ignorance?" He closed the curtains and sank into the sofa, his hands trembling slightly. "How did it come to this?" he whispered. That evening, Ada Aura finally came downstairs. Her face was pale but calm. She stood in front of him, arms folded. "Chaik," she said quietly, "I begged you so many times to watch your words. But you never listened. You always think power lasts forever." He tried to speak, but she cut him off. "No. Let me finish. I watched that video too. The way you laughed at that woman. I couldn't even recognize you. You looked like a stranger." He lowered his head. "I didn't mean it that way. I was under pressure. Cameras everywhere, people watching." "Pressure?" she interrupted. "That woman had nothing, and she still said God bless you. Tell me, who's richer between the two of you?" The silence between them felt like punishment. She turned away, her voice trembling. "You've forgotten what humility means. Maybe now you'll learn." 4 days, the scandal refused to fade. The markets buzzed with talk. Some people said Nena had disappeared from her usual spot. Others claimed she was seen walking toward a church compound one evening, carrying a small plastic bag and murmuring to herself. The governor's advisors tried everything, press statements, apologies, even donations to charity, but the public didn't buy it. They saw his apology as another performance. The comments online were merciless. "He's only sorry because he got caught," someone wrote. Where was his humanity before? 2 weeks passed, and the governor's image had sunk beyond repair. Opposition parties used the moment to call for his resignation. Members of his own cabinet began to resign quietly, each trying to save their reputation. The house that once hosted endless laughter and banquets now echoed with silence and regret. One night, while everyone slept, Chaik walked through the compound alone. The air was cool, the sky heavy with clouds. He sat on a bench near the garden and thought of everything he had lost: trust, respect, peace. His mind drifted back to that woman's face, the way she looked up at him with a mix of pain and dignity. He whispered, "Where are you now?" A soft voice behind him made him flinch. "Governor, you should rest." It was his driver, a booker. The man had worked for him for 8 years, always quiet, always loyal. But tonight his eyes carried pity. "Sir, I think you should find that woman," a booker said gently. "You need to look her in the eye and apologize. Not on television. Not through a statement. But in person. Maybe then your heart will breathe again." Chaik nodded slowly. "Find her for me, please." The next morning, a booker drove through the city, asking around at the market, the church near the river, and the hospital down the street. For days, there was no sign of Nena. Some said she had left for her village. Others believed she had fallen ill and died quietly somewhere. But one old woman pointed him to a small mission house outside the city, saying, "There's a lady there who prays for people every morning. They call her Sister Nena. Maybe that's who you're looking for." A booker wasted no time. He went there at dawn and found her sitting under shade, surrounded by people who had come for prayer. Her clothes were still simple, but her eyes glowed with peace. She spoke gently, laying hands on a woman carrying a child. "God will provide," she said softly. When a booker approached her and mentioned the governor's name, her expression didn't change. She simply nodded. "Tell him to come himself," she said. "No convoy. No cameras. Just him." That night, Chaik sat in his study, staring at his reflection in the glass. Fear and shame wrestled inside him. "Go," Aurora said quietly from the doorway. "You've lost everything else. Don't lose your soul too." Before dawn, he stepped out in plain clothes, no sirens, no escorts, just him and a booker. The drive was long and silent. When they reached the mission house, the sky was gray and heavy with clouds. Children played near the gate, their laughter echoing through the calm. When he stepped out, a few people recognized him, but no one shouted or pointed. They simply stared, waiting to see what he would do. He walked slowly toward the woman sitting under the shade. Nena looked up and met his eyes. For a long moment, neither spoke. The man who once mocked her now stood before her, tired, humbled, and broken in ways words couldn't describe. "I came to say I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice unsteady. "I was blind, proud, and foolish. You didn't deserve what I did. I can't undo it, but I want to ask for your forgiveness." The air around them grew still. People stopped moving, listening quietly. Nena watched him, her face unreadable. Then she smiled faintly and said, "Governor, you didn't mock me, you mocked your own humanity. But I forgive you. Because if I hold on to anger, I'll be no different." Her words pierced through him like light breaking into a dark room. His knees gave way, and he knelt on the ground. The crowd gasped, but Nena only reached out her hand and helped him up gently. "You can rise again," she said softly. "But this time, let it be from your heart." That moment changed everything. Reporters later tried to capture it, but the true power of that scene wasn't in pictures or headlines, it was in the quiet way people spoke about it afterwards. "He knelt," they said. "And she forgave." But what no one knew was that the story wasn't done yet. Something even deeper was waiting to unfold, something that would turn both their lives in a direction neither of them expected. The next morning after that unexpected encounter, word spread through Enugu like a quiet ripple across still water. People spoke in lowered tones about what had happened at the mission house, how the mighty Governor Chaik had gone to his knees before the beggar woman he once mocked, and how she, instead of cursing him, forgave him with calm grace. No one could believe it until pictures began to surface online. A grainy photo taken by a passerby showed Chaik kneeling before Nena, his head bowed, his once proud shoulders slumped like a man who had finally seen himself clearly. The image tore through social media faster than any press release ever could. But this time, it wasn't mockery that followed. It was silence first, then surprise, then something that sounded almost like respect. People who had cursed him weeks earlier began to speak differently. "He actually went there himself," one man said at a newspaper stand. "No convoy. No media." Another woman replied softly, "That's not easy for a man like him. Maybe he's truly changed." Still, not everyone believed it. Some politicians called it a stunt. Others said he was only pretending to win public sympathy. The debate raged on, but none of it mattered to Chaik anymore. Something inside him had shifted completely. The weight he had been carrying for weeks felt lighter, yet a deep ache remained. He realized that his whole life had been built on applause, but in that moment with Nena, he had felt something he hadn't known in years: peace. For the next few days, he stayed away from the office, ignoring the endless calls from the capital. The television stayed off. His once busy home became a quiet refuge where he and Aurora began to talk again like they used to when they were younger and still dreaming. They sat in the garden one night, the moon hanging pale above them. Aurora reached out and touched his hand. "I saw what you did," she said softly. "And for the first time, I felt proud of you again." He turned to her, guilt flickering in his eyes. "I thought I was saving face, but I was only losing myself. That woman, she showed me what strength really looks like. She had nothing, yet she forgave me without asking for anything." Aurora nodded. "Maybe it's time you stop leading for power and start leading for people." Those words stayed with him long after she went inside. The next morning, he called his aide and told him to prepare a visit, not to commissioners or political allies, but to the city's homeless shelters and orphan homes. His security chief hesitated, thinking it was some political gimmick, but Chaik's tone left no room for doubt. "No cameras," he said firmly. "No press. I just want to listen." The drive through the inner parts of the city humbled him further. Streets he had ignored for years suddenly came alive in his eyes: children selling sachet water under the hot sun, women mending torn clothes at street corners, men pushing wheelbarrows filled with scrap metal. Every face told a story of survival. At one shelter, an elderly caretaker approached him cautiously. "Governor, we didn't expect you. We haven't had any visitor from government here before." He smiled faintly. Then it's about time that changed. He spent the afternoon speaking to the residents, listening to their worries. There were women like Nena, widows who had lost everything and yet carried faith stronger than stone. There were men who used to work in factories that had long shut down, now surviving by fixing broken shoes. And there were young people with tired eyes, still searching for a reason to believe tomorrow could be better. That day, something broke in him completely. He knew then that apologies weren't enough. If he wanted redemption, it had to come through action. By the following week, a quiet transformation began to unfold in the governor's office. The usual arrogance that filled the air was gone. Meetings that once dragged into vanity speeches turned into listening sessions. He called his commissioners and told them bluntly, "We've been building monuments and forgetting people. That ends today." At first, they thought it was just another speech, but soon they realized he meant it. He ordered immediate reforms for small traders' taxes, created a new fund for widows and single mothers, and personally supervised the distribution of small grants. He banned the harassment of street hawkers and announced free vocational training for anyone willing to learn a trade. The media tried to twist his motives again, but this time, his consistency began to silence them. Even his harshest critics found themselves pausing before they spoke. "Something's different about him," one journalist admitted during a live program. "He's not chasing attention anymore. Maybe he really did learn his lesson." Meanwhile, Nena continued her quiet life at the mission house. She didn't go around telling anyone what had happened. She prayed, counseled the broken, and kept her faith steady. But one morning, a government vehicle stopped outside the compound, and a young official stepped down holding an envelope. He walked up to her shyly and said, "Ma, His Excellency sent me. He asked me to deliver this in person." She opened it gently. Inside was a handwritten note. The words were simple. "You taught me humility, not with words but with grace. The state owes you more than an apology. I owe you my change. Please accept this small gesture as a start of something right." Underneath the note was a signed document transferring ownership of a small parcel of land and a modest house in her name, fully furnished, fully hers. Nena's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She only smiled and looked up, whispering, "Thank you, God. But don't bless him because he gave me something, bless him because he finally saw." That same week, the governor's transformation reached farther than anyone expected. Markets that had once feared government task forces began to breathe again. Traders could sell without paying bribes. Roads in forgotten neighborhoods were fixed. Schools received new supplies. It was as though a sleeping conscience had finally awakened in the heart of leadership. But beneath all the new energy, not everyone was happy. Some of his longtime allies, the men who had thrived under his former arrogance, began to grumble. They had built their wealth through backdoor deals and inflated contracts, and this new, humbled version of the governor was bad for business. One evening, as he sat reviewing project reports, his chief of staff, Uche, walked in with a careful smile. "Your Excellency, some members of the council want to meet with you privately. They're concerned about the new policies." Chaik didn't look up. Concerned or threatened? Uche hesitated. "They say you're making decisions too quickly, cutting off deals they had already." He raised a hand. "Then tell them to find honest work. I'm done running government like a market." Uche's smile faded. "You're changing too fast, sir. You're making enemies." Chaik leaned back in his chair and said quietly, "If doing what's right makes me enemies, then so be it. I'd rather lose power than lose my soul again." Those words spread quietly among the corridors of power, unsettling some, inspiring others. His opponents tried to plot, but the people had begun to see the change too clearly to be deceived again. Even those who had once despised him now spoke with cautious admiration. As weeks turned to months, Chaik became a different kind of governor, one who walked through markets without a convoy, who sat with mechanics under trees to ask what they needed most. He no longer cared for titles or appearances. When he spoke, people listened because they could feel that his words finally matched his actions. But deep inside, he carried one last burden, the question of why life had chosen Nena as his mirror. One evening, he returned to the mission house, not as a governor, but as a man seeking understanding. She welcomed him with the same calm smile as before and served him water in a simple plastic cup. "Why didn't you curse me that day?" he asked quietly. "After everything I did." Nena looked at him, her voice steady and gentle. "Because pain doesn't heal pain. When you mocked me, you were already broken, even if you didn't know it. God just allowed me to be the face you would see when your own pride finally cracked." He sat there, humbled again, and nodded slowly. Then maybe that was mercy in disguise. She smiled faintly. Sometimes God doesn't punish to destroy. He humbles to rebuild. That night, when Chaik left the mission house, he didn't take his car immediately. He walked down the narrow path toward the road, listening to the quiet sounds of the evening, the laughter of children playing nearby, the faint call of someone selling roasted plantain, the soft hum of life carrying on. For the first time, he understood that true power wasn't in commanding others, it was in lifting them. And even though he didn't know what awaited him next, he felt ready. But destiny wasn't done with either of them. What began as a moment of humiliation was about to twist once again, in a way no one could have predicted, because sometimes, when grace meets power, it doesn't just heal, it transforms everything in its path. Months passed, and Enugu began to wear a different face. The people could feel the difference, not through empty speeches or painted billboards, but in small, steady changes that touched everyday life. The governor who once roared from behind microphones now walked among them quietly, asking, listening, fixing. His convoy no longer blocked the roads. His presence no longer carried fear. Yet, Behind the calm, something was stirring. Power never forgets, and those who had fed fat from the old system began to grow restless. Meetings started happening at night in hidden corners of hotels and private lounges, men in agbadas whispering, plotting, and frowning at how their easy flow of money had stopped. They had tolerated Chaik's sudden righteousness at first, believing it would fade. But now, it had gone too far. At the center of their discontent was Chief Maduka, a man whose influence in the state had been woven deep into politics long before Chaik became governor. He was known for his charm and ruthlessness in equal measure. Every contract that passed through the government house once had his hand on it. And now, with Chaik's reforms cutting through corruption, Maduka's empire was beginning to crack. "He's forgotten who helped him rise," Maduka said bitterly one evening, his gold rings glinting as he slammed his palm on the table. "A man who kneels before a beggar cannot rule strong men. He has lost his edge, and if we don't stop him now, he will ruin everything we built." One of the others nodded nervously. "But the people love him now. If we move against him carelessly, it might backfire." Maduka smiled thinly. "Then we won't move carelessly. We'll let him destroy himself. Pride might have fallen once, but redemption breeds another kind of arrogance, the kind that trusts too easily. We'll use that." While their plots thickened in shadows, Chaik's days grew heavier. He had begun rebuilding schools, setting up rural clinics, and creating small grants for widows like Nena to start small businesses. But for every step forward, he faced 10 steps of resistance. Files disappeared mysteriously. Approved projects stalled midway. Payments were delayed. Each sabotage was quiet, careful, deliberate. One afternoon, as he sat reviewing reports, Ada Aura walked into his office, her face drawn with concern. "You look tired," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. He smiled faintly. "Tired is a small word. Every time I fix one thing, another breaks. Sometimes I wonder if this is worth it." Ada Aura sat beside him. "It is. You're not fighting for approval anymore, Chaik. You're fighting for change. Change never comes easy. But you can't lose focus now." Her words steadied him. He nodded slowly, closing the file before him. "You're right. I'll keep going." That evening, he attended a community outreach event where Nena was invited as a guest speaker. She spoke simply about faith, about how small acts of kindness could ripple into something great. Her words carried no pride, no bitterness, just quiet strength. When she mentioned the importance of forgiving leadership that once failed its people, the crowd listened with deep attention. Chaik sat in the audience, moved again by her grace. After the event, he walked up to her. "You speak as if you've never known pain," he said softly. She smiled. "Pain is what taught me to speak that way. I only changed the way I see it." He nodded. "I wish everyone could see through your eyes." But as they talked, a man stood by the gate, watching them intently. His name was Sagan, one of Maduka's loyal errand men. He quietly took pictures of them together, sending them to his boss with a message that read, "They seem close. We can use this." The next morning, headlines screamed across every newspaper and online blog, "Governor's secret connection with former beggar woman raises questions." They wrote lies, twisted stories suggesting that Nena was being used as cover for financial scandals, that the grants she received were part of hidden deals. Some even claimed the governor had been visiting her for reasons beyond politics. The gossip spread fast. The same people who once praised his humility now whispered behind his back, "Maybe he's not as righteous as he looks. How can a governor spend so much time with one woman? Something is off." The blow was heavy. In 1 week, everything he had rebuilt began to wobble again. His political enemies didn't stop there. They forged documents, fabricated reports, and leaked them online, making it seem like funds from the widow empowerment scheme had been misappropriated. The House of Change was shaking once more. Inside the governor's office, tension hung thick in the air. His advisors shuffled nervously as he slammed a file shut. "They think they can break me again," he said through clenched teeth. "But not this time." One of his aides whispered, Sir, it's dangerous to push back now. The opposition has the media, the council, even some of your own people. Chaik leaned forward. Then I'll fight with truth. That's all I have left. Later that night, Aurora came into the room and found him sitting in the dark. The rumors are ugly, she said quietly. You can't ignore them. You have to speak up. He turned to her slowly. If I speak, they'll twist my words. If I stay silent, they'll fill the silence with lies. What should I do? She sat beside him. Be who you've become. The people saw your change once. They'll see it again. But as she spoke, another blow was coming, one that neither of them saw coming. A week later, Chaik woke up to a phone call at dawn. It was his driver, voice trembling. Sir, they've arrested Nena. He sat up sharply. What? They said it's for misusing government funds meant for widows. They took her from the mission house this morning. Chaik's heart pounded. That's impossible. She didn't even touch the money directly. He rushed out of bed, barely dressing before heading to the police headquarters. The officers, nervous but firm, claimed they were following official orders from above. The entire thing was staged to humiliate him. When he saw Nena sitting quietly on a bench inside the station, his throat tightened. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She only looked tired but peaceful, her eyes lifting to meet his. I'm sorry, he said softly, his voice cracking. She shook her head gently. Don't be. If this is how truth must pass through fire, let it burn. What matters is what comes out after. Her calmness broke him completely. He turned to the officers and demanded her immediate release, but they refused, saying they needed higher clearance. It took his lawyer and several calls to get her out by evening. When they finally stepped outside, the setting sun painted everything in a soft orange glow. People stared, cameras clicked, questions flew, but Nena just whispered, Don't fight this with anger. Let your actions speak again. The truth doesn't shout, it endures. That night, he held a press conference. He didn't read from a script or use prepared lines. He spoke plainly, from his heart. I've made many mistakes in my life, he began. But I have never, and will never, use another person's pain for gain. The woman you call a beggar is a reminder that leadership must serve, not oppress. If that makes me weak in the eyes of politics, then so be it. The words spread faster than his enemies expected. Within days, public sympathy swung back in his favor. People who had once doubted him now stood by him fiercely. The false documents were traced back to Maduka's network, and soon, arrests followed. Justice moved slowly, but it moved. Maduka's allies turned against him, revealing details of their plot. By the time it reached the news, his empire had begun to crumble. The people finally saw who had truly been behind the chaos. One evening, as rain fell lightly over the city, Chaik visited Nena again. She was sitting outside her new home, a small smile on her lips as she watched children playing nearby. When he arrived, she stood and greeted him warmly. I told you truth endures, she said softly. He nodded. You were right. I wanted to defend myself, but you taught me to let truth breathe on its own. She looked at him for a long moment. Then keep breathing it. Don't let power steal it again. He smiled faintly. I won't. The wind rustled the trees nearby, carrying the smell of wet earth and something that felt like peace. For the first time in years, Chaik didn't feel like a governor trying to prove himself. He felt like a man who had finally understood what power was meant for, to serve, not to be served. But as the rain thickened and thunder rumbled far in the distance, neither of them knew that destiny was still moving. The story that had humbled a governor and healed a beggar was about to take a turn that would test the very meaning of forgiveness, and reveal a secret that would shake the state again, this time in a way no one saw coming. The months after Nena's brief imprisonment were some of the most transformative for Governor Chaik Obi. The scandal, the false accusations, and the public uproar had left scars, but they had also taught him lessons no lecture or speech ever could. He worked tirelessly now, not for his image, but for the people, and his efforts began to bear fruit. Roads were repaired in forgotten neighborhoods, schools that had once been empty shells of classrooms now rang with the laughter of children, and small traders finally operated without fear of harassment. Nena, meanwhile, became a quiet force in the city. Her mission house transformed into a center where widows, unemployed women, and marginalized men came to learn skills, receive counsel, or simply find a place where someone cared. She didn't seek recognition. She didn't demand attention. But her influence was felt everywhere. People spoke of her wisdom, her resilience, and her ability to forgive when it would have been easier to curse. Despite the progress, dark clouds were gathering in secret corridors. Maduka, the man whose empire had started to crumble after Chaik's reforms, had not disappeared. Instead, he was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. He had learned that brute force wouldn't work anymore. Chaik had too much public goodwill, too much momentum. So Maduka's plan was subtle, one that would attack Chaik's heart and his trust rather than his reputation. It began quietly. First, small rumors about Nena's center started circulating. Whispered questions appeared online, asking whether she was accepting funds in secret, whether she had ties to foreign donors with questionable intentions. Then, more personal attacks emerged, people questioning why the governor spent so much time visiting her, why she received land and support, insinuating a relationship that did not exist. At first, Chaik ignored them. He had learned the hard way that not every noise deserved a reaction. But when a respected journalist published a story questioning Nena's character, claiming she had mismanaged a small government grant, Chaik felt a familiar ache in his chest. The false narrative spread like wildfire. Even some of his advisors hesitated, afraid to publicly defend Nena, unsure of what their careers might face if the allegations gained traction. Chaik knew then that this was more than politics, it was a test of loyalty, of courage, and of faith. He went straight to Nena, who was calmly overseeing a group of women weaving baskets in the yard of her compound. The sunlight caught the fibers of the baskets, turning them golden, and children ran between the women, laughing and playing. Nena looked up as he approached, serene as ever. "They're attacking you again," he said quietly, his voice low but tense. She smiled faintly, not in mockery, but in quiet understanding. "And yet the work continues," she said. "Rumors have power only if you give them attention. Truth endures without defense." He shook his head. "It's not just words this time. They're trying to ruin everything you've built. I can't let that happen." She stood and faced him fully. "Chaik, no one can ruin what God has planted. But if you act in anger, even for me, you risk losing yourself again. Be careful. Don't fight lies with rage." Her words struck him like a blow. He had fought that battle before, and he had lost himself in the process. "Then what do I do?" he asked softly. "Stand firm. Support me quietly. Protect the work, not your pride. And trust me," she said. Chaik nodded, and together they devised a plan. They would document everything, every penny spent, every donation received, every grant distributed. Nena's center became a model of transparency. Volunteers recorded receipts, kept meticulous logs, and welcomed inspections. Meanwhile, Chaik began meeting with journalists personally, showing them the truth of what was happening at the center. Slowly, the tide began to turn. But Maduka was relentless. He had underestimated Nena's influence and Chaik's newfound wisdom, but he was clever. One evening, a letter arrived at Nena's center, an anonymous warning claiming that her life was in danger. Inside were photographs of the building, taken from different angles, suggesting that someone was watching her every move. Nena remained calm when Chaik showed her the letter. "Fear is only as strong as the power you give it," she said softly. "We must be vigilant, but not terrified." Chaik, however, could not shake the feeling of unease. The darkness he had faced in the past, scandals, lies, betrayal, was returning in a more dangerous form. He contacted his trusted security team, placing guards around the center discreetly, while also keeping his visits low-key to avoid drawing attention. Days turned into weeks. Tension hung in the city like a thick fog. Maduka made moves quietly. He bribed minor officials, spread rumors through sympathetic media, and even tried to infiltrate Nena's network with people posing as volunteers. Each attempt was subtle, almost invisible, but Chaik and Nena detected the patterns quickly. One afternoon, Chaik arrived at the center to find a small fire had broken out in the storage room where woven baskets and supplies were kept. Smoke curled into the sky, and a few volunteers were panicking. Nena stood in the middle of the courtyard, calm as ever, guiding people to safety. "This is just fire," she said quietly, her voice carrying over the chaos. "It can burn things, but it cannot burn faith or hope." Chaik watched her, or mixing with a bitter anger. He knew who was behind it, and he wanted to rush out, confront Maduka, show the world that he could still destroy enemies with power. But Nena's gaze stopped him. "Control yourself," she said. "Let the work speak louder than vengeance." He took a deep breath, and together they organized the volunteers to extinguish the fire. By nightfall, the room was saved, the supplies mostly intact. The city had no idea what had nearly happened, but Chaik felt it in his chest, the first real test of how far he was willing to go to protect truth without resorting to old habits of aggression. That evening, Nena invited Chaik to sit outside with her. They watched as children ran barefoot through puddles, laughing despite the gray clouds overhead. "Do you ever wonder why life allowed you to rise and fall before meeting me?" Nena asked. Chaik nodded slowly. "I think it was so I could learn humility. But every time I think I've learned enough, something new tests me." She smiled faintly. "Humility is a river, not a destination. It flows and sometimes floods. But the river is always moving, always alive. You must learn to move with it." He stared at her quietly, letting her words sink in. "And if the flood comes, then you float, or you drown. But never fight the current with pride," she said simply. The next morning, Chaik returned to the governor's office, determined to take control of the situation without losing his integrity. He met with the finance commissioner, who had hesitated earlier, and instructed him to audit Nena's center publicly. "Transparency is our shield," he said firmly. "We will let the world see the truth, and nothing else matters." When the audit was completed, every transaction, every grant, every donation was accounted for. The results were published widely. Nena's center had been managed with meticulous honesty. Public opinion shifted almost immediately. People who had doubted her, and even Chaik, now praised them both. Maduka's plots began to unravel. Allies turned against him, fearing exposure. Attempts at intimidation failed. Even the fire in the storage room, when investigated, revealed no evidence linking it to Nena or Chaik, leaving Maduka's hand invisible but suspected. His shadow over the city began to fade, and Chaik's reputation as a leader who could face lies, threats, and sabotage with integrity strengthened. Yet, as the city celebrated this quiet victory, Chaik and Nena knew it was not over. The forces that had tried to manipulate and destroy them were still out there, watching, waiting. Every day brought new challenges, subtle and unseen, like roots growing beneath the surface. One evening, as they walked through the center's garden, the orange light of the setting sun painting the leaves golden, Chaik turned to Nena. "You've taught me more than I could ever imagine. But I feel it, you know it too. Something bigger is coming." She nodded slowly. "I know. Life rarely stops testing those who choose to walk the right path. But it will not break us. We have learned to endure." And so they stood together, silent in the twilight, aware that the battle was far from over. The city around them thrummed with life, hopeful, resilient, and fragile, and the storm that had tested power, humility, and truth was only gathering strength for its next move. In the shadows beyond the city, Maduka watched from a distance, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his eyes cold and calculating. The pieces were not yet in place, but he smiled faintly. Soon, the game would begin again, and this time, he whispered to himself, it would be a storm no one could see coming. Chaik and Nena, unaware of the exact nature of the threat, returned to the center, hearts steady but alert. They had survived ridicule, false accusations, sabotage, and threats. But the greatest test, the one that would truly reveal the strength of forgiveness, courage, and integrity, was still ahead. And the city, though thriving, waited unknowingly for the next chapter that would change everything once again. The city of Enugu had grown quieter in its expectation, though beneath the surface, tension lingered like the thick humidity before a storm. Governor Chike had spent months rebuilding trust, bridging gaps, and creating a life of service that slowly became the heartbeat of the city. Yet, he and Nena knew that true transformation, both for a man and a state, was rarely without trials. It began one morning with a simple letter slipped under the gate of Nena's center. The paper was plain, unsigned, and the words were few: "Your kindness makes him vulnerable. Beware of shadows that smile." Nena read it carefully, her calm expression betraying nothing. She folded the letter and handed it to Chike when he arrived later that morning. Chike frowned as he read the words. "It's Maduka," he muttered. "He's trying to frighten us into making mistakes." Nena shook her head. "Fear is only dangerous when we act from it. We will continue as we have, careful, honest, steadfast. Let shadows try to move. Light always exposes them." Despite her confidence, both of them knew that subtle threats were often harder to fight than obvious ones. Over the next few days, small incidents began happening. A shipment of supplies for the center went missing, volunteers reported suspicious strangers loitering around the grounds, and anonymous messages arrived via phone warning them to stop their work or face consequences. Chike instructed his security team to step up vigilance, but he refused to let the fear dictate his actions. One afternoon, while Chike was overseeing the renovation of a neglected school, he noticed a man watching him from across the street. The man was well dressed, but his eyes were sharp and calculating. Chike felt a cold knot of recognition. He turned to his aide. "That man. Who is he?" The aide checked quickly. "He has no ID, sir. But he's been spotted around other projects you've visited." Chike's jaw tightened. "Keep an eye on him. And make sure Nena's center is secure. I don't care what it takes." By evening, the tension escalated. The governor's office received an anonymous tip suggesting that someone was planning an arson attack, not on the center, but on a small settlement of widows and vulnerable families supported indirectly through Nena's network. The threat was precise, detailing times and methods. Chike gathered his team immediately, and they coordinated with local authorities to monitor the settlement. When night fell, Chike went to the settlement himself, walking among the narrow pathways between the houses. He found women sitting outside, chatting quietly, children playing, unaware of the danger they had been under. He breathed a sigh of relief, but his heart was heavy. He realized that Maduka's reach had become deeper and more desperate. Returning to Nena's center, Chike sat with her beneath the trees. The orange glow of the setting sun turned the garden golden, and yet his mind was restless. "He's becoming reckless," Chike said quietly. "He's not just trying to damage my reputation anymore. He wants to harm people, to create chaos, to make us fail." Nena nodded slowly. "And yet, chaos cannot break what is built on truth. We have to stay grounded, continue helping, continue serving. That is our shield." Days passed, and the threats continued in subtle ways: delayed payments for supplies, false rumors about staff, and even attempts to intimidate volunteers. Chike realized that Maduka had learned that brute force could not defeat them. Only strategy, manipulation, and fear could work, but even that would fail against patience and courage. One morning, Nena called Chike urgently. A large shipment of food and building materials had been stolen on the way to the center. Volunteers were distraught. Chike's face hardened. "This ends now," he said, and he personally coordinated an investigation. He traced the theft to one of Maduka's operatives, and within a week, the stolen goods were recovered, and the culprit was in custody. But Maduka's plan had evolved. He realized that Chike's loyalty to Nena and the people was his greatest strength, and he sought to exploit it in the most dangerous way. He orchestrated a public scandal, planting false evidence that suggested Chike had misappropriated government funds to benefit Nena's center personally. Within hours, social media erupted, news outlets reported allegations, and whispers spread across the city. Chike, however, had anticipated such a move. He called an emergency press briefing, this time standing with Nena and volunteers who had worked on the center. He presented every document, every transaction, every ledger, showing complete transparency. Reporters were allowed to visit the center, inspect the operations, and speak to volunteers and beneficiaries. The public saw the truth firsthand, and Maduka's carefully crafted lies crumbled in real time. Still, the personal toll weighed on Chaik. One night, exhausted and frustrated, he confided in Nena. "It never ends, does it?" he asked quietly, sitting on the steps outside the center. Nena placed a hand on his shoulder. "Life tests those who dare to do right. But it also teaches them resilience. You are stronger now than the day you first knelt before me." Her words gave him courage, and together, they began to fortify the center not just physically, but strategically. They built stronger networks with community leaders, trained volunteers to respond to threats, and worked on communication strategies to counter misinformation immediately. As weeks went by, Maduka's influence continued to weaken. His former allies turned on him, realizing that his schemes were reckless and would only bring ruin. The government began investigations into his past dealings, uncovering hidden corruption that shocked the state. Chaik's reputation, once again, strengthened, not through speeches or showy acts, but through unwavering integrity and consistent action. The people of Enugu began to see him not as a man to be feared, but as a leader who could face lies, sabotage, and personal attacks and still stand firm. One evening, after a long day of overseeing new projects, Chaik returned to Nena's center. She was sitting in the courtyard, watching children play. He walked quietly toward her. "Do you ever think it will truly end?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "There will always be storms, Chaik. But storms pass. What remains is the work done in faith, honesty, and love. That is unshakable." Chaik sat beside her. "I've learned that now. But I don't know if I'll ever feel free from the weight of what I've done before." Nena looked at him with calm eyes. "You are not the man you were. Every act of courage, every moment of integrity, erases a fraction of the past. Redemption is a journey, not a destination. Keep walking, and one day, the weight will lift." As they watched the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Chaik realized that life had given him a rare gift. He had been humbled, tested, and broken, but he had also been given the chance to rebuild, not just the city, but himself. And then, in the quiet of the evening, a new understanding settled over him. True power was not in titles, not in fear, not in wealth. It was in service, in courage, and in the ability to forgive, even when the world sought to destroy. For the first time in years, Chaik felt at peace. The storms would come, the enemies would plot, and life would continue to test him, but he knew he would face every challenge with a steadfast heart. Beside him, Nena's calm presence reminded him that some people were sent to guide others, not by power, but by grace. And as the city of Enugu rested under the soft glow of the moon, Chaik and Nena stood together, knowing that the story that had once begun with mockery and humiliation had transformed into a tale of courage, forgiveness, and unshakable integrity. The people would remember it, not for the scandal, not for the fear, not for the fall, but for the rise. For the day when a governor knelt, when a woman forgave, and when true leadership finally learned to walk hand in hand with humility. The storms had passed, but the lessons endured. And in the heart of Enugu, the light of change shone brighter than ever before. Thank you for following this powerful journey of pride, downfall, courage, and true change. Stories like this remind us that life can flip in one night, and those we look down on today might be the very people who lift us up tomorrow. If you enjoyed this emotional tale and would love to experience more touching stories like it, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Also, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what your local time says at this moment. Your support keeps this series alive and growing. More heart-grabbing stories are coming your way. Stay tuned.